Please help me welcome J Loren Norris.
I was stopped one time driving down the highway. I didn't even see the patrolman until we were like 5 feet away from each other. And I thought, he'll never turn around. He's not coming after me at all. And I was wrong. I want to talk about that in this episode of Leading Leaders.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders podcast, and I was probably 18 or 19 years old. I had an old classic. Most people wouldn't call it a muscle car. It was a Chevy Impala. It was a fastback two-door, but it was a boat. It was a tuna boat. I mean, you could have landed an aircraft on the trunk of this thing, between the trunk lid and the roof and the flat window in the back. It was enormous. But I love to go fast in that old car, and I was on a 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere between Austin and home. I wasn't paying any attention to speed. I was just jamming out to my music and cruising down the highway with the windows open. And when I saw that trooper sitting there, I thought, I wonder if I'm speeding. I looked down at the speedometer, and I had already let off and downshifted one gear, and I really don't know how fast I was going. Well, he pulled out of that little bar ditch in his tiny little Mustang SVO, and he caught me in like less than a quarter of a mile. I pulled over. We had a quick conversation, and he looked at me and he said, what do you got under the hood? I said, it's just factory. He said, no, it's not. I said, no, really it is. It's the same motor that came in it from the factory. It's an old Chevy 283. He said, I got to see it. So I popped the hood, and he looked down underneath there, and he looked at me, and he shook his head, and he said, I'm going to have to do something I've never done before. I said, what's that? He said, I can't write you a ticket for how fast my radar says you were actually going, because no one would believe me when I write the rest of the details about this car. But I am going to write you a ticket for 75 and a 55, because nobody would believe 125 and climbing, which is what my radar said when you passed me. So you still get a ticket. You're still going to have to pay a pretty hefty fine, but I don't have to impound your car, and you probably aren't going to go to jail right away. But you need to take care of this ticket, and you need to slow down, Leadfoot. Now, if I had pulled over and said, I don't know how fast I was going, and I don't know what the speed limit is on this road, what do you think he would have said to me? Well, the same thing he said every other time, not him, but every other law enforcement officer who ever pulled me over for speeding. If I said, I don't know what the speed limit is on this road, they would say, that doesn't matter. The law doesn't care if you know the law. It's the law. You have to obey it. And it's kind of like the law of gravity. If you don't like it, jump off a building and see if it changes. No, it doesn't. And the law of gravity doesn't care if you like it or you don't. The law of intuition. You know, there's a great book by John Maxwell called The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. They're laws. They're not ideas. They're not suggestions. They're not could-bes. They're not would-bes. They're not wanna-bes. They're laws. They work the same for everybody on every part of the planet who's involved in human relationships and leadership. They're laws. I heard a comedian one time talking about his mushrooms. And he said, they don't usually leave me in the sales stand because I'm just too short and abrupt, and I just tell it like it is, and they don't like that. And I had a lady come up to me, and she picked up the jar, and she looked at the mushrooms, and she said, are they organic? And I said, they're mushrooms. They're for sale. He went through this entire sequence, and repeatedly, his answer was the same. It didn't matter how silly her question was, or how scientifically detailed her question was. None of those things were actually relevant to the conversation from his point of view. There were only two things that mattered from his worldview in that moment, and that was, they mushrooms. They're for sale. Either you buy them or you don't buy them. If you don't buy them, I'll sell them to somebody else. They're mushrooms. They're for sale. That's it. See, these laws of leadership, they don't ask if you like them or not. These principles of how we treat each other and how we use our time or don't use our time, how we negotiate and navigate, and how we do what we do as leaders. None of those principles, values, rules, laws, none of them ask for permission to be laws. None of them ask you, hey, you like this law? What if we did something different? That doesn't matter. The law doesn't care. The law is the law. And if you want to learn leadership, you've got to learn the laws. The law of the picture is one of my favorites of John Maxwell's laws of leadership. The law of the picture says people do what people see. There's another way to say that. People mimic what you model in front of them. They don't do what you tell them to do. They do what they see you do. If you think that law is not valid and accurate and as consistent as the law of gravity, spend some time with the toddler. People do what people see. Doesn't matter how many times you correct them. Doesn't matter how many times you tell them, don't do that or don't do it like that. If you're doing what you're telling them not to do, guess what they're going to do? They're mushrooms. They're for sale. It's a law. People do what people see. Another one of those laws that he calls the Big Mo. It's a very important law. It's the law of momentum. I believe it was Newton who had another theory similar to the law of momentum. He said, things at rest, they tend to stay at rest. And things in motion, well, they tend to remain in motion until an unstoppable force meets an irresistible object. Then you have a collision. But the law of momentum says if we can just get this thing going, get the right communications going, get the right relationships going, get the right sales practices going, get things moving in the right direction. Now, momentum, well, it's relative to the size of what you're trying to move. I mean, if you're trying to create momentum with a ping pong ball, that's not hard. You can move a ping pong ball. If you keep doing it, you can move a ping pong ball a long way. In fact, you can move a ping pong ball with an air cannon and never physically touch it. Just the movement of the air will move a ping pong ball, not so much with the bowling ball. It's heavier. It's got more mass. It's more dense, like some people we lead. That means it takes more to create momentum. Just to get it going requires more of you, more effort, more energy, more focus, more concentration, more persistence, more consistency. All of these are elements of creating momentum. Now, the challenge that we have often in leadership is that we forget that momentum is a law. And because momentum is a law, it demands that if we get something going, we can't just leave it alone and expect it to stay in motion. Now, an object in motion does tend to stay in motion, but only until inertia runs out. And then, all of a sudden, you got no motion. Jim Collins talked about it. He called it the flywheel. Right? The flywheel is that thing that once you get it going, it kind of takes on momentum of its own, and it will, to some degree, continue to create momentum within the system that it's attached. But see, even the flywheel in your car, it requires combustion. And combustion requires fuel and air and some kind of spark or ignition. And if you don't have fuel or air, well, you don't really have combustion. And if you don't have combustion, your flywheel is, well, it's going to come to rest. And when it does, well, the whole thing stops. I mean, literally just stops. So even a flywheel, which is designed to gain momentum and keep momentum and transfer momentum into the torque converter and transmission, and we don't want to get too deep into that, but the reality is even those things in your organization specifically designed to capture energy and transfer that energy into motion and momentum, even those things will come to a stop if you don't tend to them. The law of intuition that says you should be able to figure some of these things out on your own. Right? Meaning, if you've got a little bit of wisdom, a little bit of knowledge, a little bit of experience, and you kind of blend those things together, there's some perceptions, some observations that are worthwhile to you to kind of apply those things in the background of your mind. They don't have to be forward-facing conversations. These don't have to be the conversations that you take to the marketplace so that you sit down with everybody. Sometimes that intuition needs to be kind of a whisper in the back of your head that, yeah, something told me. I remember hearing a guy, he said something is another name for the full of Holy Ghost, or something is another name for intuition. And he said it like this, something told me not to date that girl. Something told me not to go there for dinner. Something told me not to run through that red light. And something is your intuition. Something is your inside voice. Something is that voice that whispers in the back of your head, don't do that. That's a really bad idea. And you may not even know at the time that you hear that something talking to you. You may not have any clue why it matters or where you heard that voice before. How did that voice know that? I remember 3 o'clock in the morning coming home from an event. We were stopped at a red light. It was under a bridge that passed at a severe angle, meaning when you look to the right, those cars coming at you were actually coming from behind a blind spot of the bridge. And they were really further back than you can see. And I really couldn't see anything coming. Now, I've been a guy, Mr. Leadfoot, with 125 and a 55, like a moron. I've been that guy all my life. And I'm sitting at this red light in our big old SUV. It was a Ford Excursion. I'm sitting there at that red light waiting for the light to turn green. And I've always been the guy that the minute the light turns green, I want to take off as fast as I can, especially if there's a car beside me and I think I can maybe just outrun him through the light. Well, the light turned green and that little voice popped up. That's something, that intuition. It said, wait. I'm like, wait on what? And I sat there probably 3, 4, 5 seconds. Might have been as long as 10 seconds. I'm sitting at a green light. So not me. So very not me. Not my nature at all. And just about the time I started to take my foot off the brake, I simultaneously became aware of 2 things. Number 1, the little car in the lane beside me hasn't moved either. Light's been green 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 seconds. That little car hasn't moved. And as I become aware that the car beside me hasn't moved, an ambulance flies through the intersection. It was one of those intersections with the drainage on both sides. And so when he hit that center hump of the road he was crossing, it sure seemed to me like that ambulance went airborne. He was still running highway speed on that exit ramp. Lights and sirens blaring, but coming out of a blind spot, I had my music on. I never heard him. I never saw him until he was in the intersection in front of me. Now, in a Ford Excursion, that's like driving a school bus. That is a very large vehicle. You can get hit broadside by a lot of things and walk away from it. My wife eventually rolled that truck over, drove it upside down on an icy bridge, and walked away from it. It's a tank. But an ambulance at full highway speed might have been the end of us. For sure, without a question. Without a remote question at all, if that little tiny car next to me had pulled into that intersection and that ambulance had hit them, it could have been the end for everybody in that little car and everybody in the ambulance. That would have been a huge mess. Now, I don't know why something told me sit through this green light. I don't know how something knew. But if the law of intuition is a law, like the law of gravity, like the law of momentum. If it's a law, like the law of the picture, people do what people see, then it's a law worth paying attention to, and it's a law that will change your life if you let it. Now, here's the challenge for a lot of people. I hear people say all the time, and I heard John Maxwell on an interview podcast with Ed Milet recently. And Ed Milet said, well, John, you were a preacher for 25 years before you moved into corporate America. Well, what do you do when people say, well, I don't have the same religious values that you have. I don't have the same biblical expectations that you do. And John said, here's what I challenge them to do. You can look at my laws, my rules, my principles, my values, the things that I make decisions on, and you can accept them or not. That's fine. In fact, what I challenge you to do is go find all of the principles, the laws, the values that you base your leadership on, and let's see if they don't line up with something in the Bible anyway. That's a pretty profound thought. And I'm not saying you got to have a Bible to be a good leader. I'm just saying when you have one and you read it, you're probably going to be a better leader. At minimum, you're going to have some ancient human relationship skills that seem to work really, really well. There's this little tool I use called the Thompson chain cross-reference. The particular scripture that I read from has one down the middle between the two columns of passages, and then it has notes at the bottom as well. And one of the things the Thompson chain does is it allows you to read a verse, and then it points you to all the other places in Scripture where that same notion, idea, or word pattern appears. Recently, I stumbled across this Proverbs 6:17, I believe it is, the haughty eyes statement. 7 things God hates, right? And as I'm reading through that, I get into another place, I believe it's Proverbs 21:4 through 7. Well, the chain reference only took me to 4. But 5, 6, and 7 were like, whoa! Because it says something like this. It says, the lazy man becomes poor, and the diligent man becomes rich. I don't know if you like Solomon or not. I don't care if you've ever read a Bible or not. I would have to challenge you to ask yourself this question. Does that not prove itself to be true every single day? Now, I continued to follow that little chain reference, that verses 5, 6, and 7, and see what else was to be said about the lazy versus the diligent, the rich versus the poor. Because I grew up thinking the rich get rich, the poor go broke, and it's the rich's fault. Wait, what? It's the rich's fault. You know, the rich people, they're always out to get more money, so they take it from the poor. Kind of like that reverse Robin Hood thing, right? They steal the money from the poor. That's how they got so rich. That's what I believed. And now I'm reading this verse that says it's lazy people that get poor, and it's diligent, hardworking people that eventually become rich. And I thought, that's an interesting contradiction. If there's a law at play here, I should know which one it is. Which one is really true? Which one is an idiom or an axiom or a quotable quotesy? A cutesy little phrase, the rich get rich, the poor go broke, and it's the rich's fault. It's fun to say. It's a powerful indictment. But is it true? Now that's a question you ought to know the answer to. So I spent the next hour looking at all the little references that go back to that verse that says the lazy man, he gets broke, and the diligent man, well, he gets rich. And I thought, I want to know what else is there. And there was all kinds of stuff related to that apparent universal law, like gravity, like momentum, like the law of the picture. And what that law told me was that if you're diligent and you're hardworking, like the ant, when crisis comes, you're prepared for it. You've stored up enough to survive through the worst of times. Now, maybe that's financially, maybe that's relational equity. That's a hard thing to come by. But all of these aspects of being a better person, as John likes to say, they're all uphill. Nothing good comes when you're rolling downhill. I think of that old song, we're all rolling downhill like a snowball headed for a very warm place. And that it ain't the beach. The idea that you're going to have to go uphill, you're going to have to work, you're going to have to be diligent, you're going to have to save, you're going to have to invest, you're going to have to do the hard thing. I heard Pedro Adeo just the other day say, a lot of people say to me, I don't want to work harder, I want to work smarter. And my reply to them is, if you're going to work smarter, do more of it. I mean, if you can make the difference, if the average Joe does hard work and you do smart work and you get a little bit ahead of him, but then you get lazy, how much smarter are you? But if you're going to work smarter, more efficiently, and add the hard work back to it, how much further along will you be if you're working smart and hard? Wait. The lazy man gets poor. How many people think that because they're working smarter, they're taking the shortcuts, they're using the hacks, they've got it all figured out, they've got the world by the tail, they don't have to work as hard because, well, they got it all figured out. And so they get complacent. Do you know what the word complacent means? If you look it up in the dictionary, I challenge you to do that. Look up the word complacent. You're going to find that it means content to a fault. What does that mean? Well, it means you got too content. I listened to an interview between Dave Ramsey and John Maxwell. And a guy calls in. He says, look, I'm making a couple $1 million a year. I've got 8 or 10 employees. Company's rocking along. I think I'm about ready to put my feet up and, chill for a while, spend some time on the beach. And John said, well, how old are you? He said, oh, I'm 35 years old, 34 years old. John said, I think it's way too early for you to put your feet up. I mean, even if you worked hard to get to where you're at, even if you've survived the failures of your past, even if you've tasted success at the level you're at now, that's only grown you so much. The real value in life isn't putting your feet up. It's growing more. It's becoming more. It's developing yourself more. And at some point, as a successful leader, you have an obligation to the people you lead to help them become successful leaders. Wow, mind-blowing moment. How many people lead for the idea that I want to get to the top, get to the success ring, get enough money in the bank, be able to put my feet up and go fishing? And they realize that I've done that and other people have helped me. And now I'm done. I don't owe them anything. They got paid along the way. Well, what about your children, your grandchildren? What about their children and grandchildren? What if they learned the principles, the laws, and the values that made you successful? I have a client who soon will be speaking in Dubai at a leadership conference. This person had a 30-year career in a professional career, and then has now had over 2 decades of success running a nonprofit. And as we talked about crafting that talk, I said, I think it's time that you move away from the nitty-gritty and the needs and the details of the nonprofit and realize you carry a leadership mantle. You've got as much to say, if not more, about what it takes to give up a 6-figure salary and move into living day by day, mortgaging your house again and again and again to keep this nonprofit running because of the good that the nonprofit does for others. But it doesn't stop in the people you serve. Ask yourself how many thousands of volunteers have walked across your door over the last 20 years whose lives will be forever changed in the way they serve others. In fact, I know for a fact there's a CEO who was 40 years a CEO of a very large organization. When they retired, stepped down, and in the board position this former CEO serves of this little nonprofit has been known to sit on the street side and wash the feet of homeless people. You don't think there's something in the law of give back? People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. The law of compassion, I believe, is where that fits. There's a law there. It's powerful. It's important. And as a leader, it's your job to carry that law on. Not time to put your feet up. Look, the laws of leadership are laws. And they don't care if you like them. You still got to learn them. They're laws. They're not for sale. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom. I encourage you to go to StoryPowerAcademy.com and check it out. Look at the different classes, the different levels, the different things that are available. You can take a lot of them a la carte. But spend some time there and see if that's the kind of thing that would change the way you communicate as a leader, as a pastor, as a counselor, as a political leader. And if that will help you, I'd love to have a conversation with you. Again, only 10 people in the elite speakers. You will have to apply for that. But if you're a candidate, I'd love to have that conversation with you. I'm J Loren Norris with Story Power Academy. I look forward to seeing you inside.